For more than 5 years, millions of pages of documents concerning the late financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein were shielded from public view, held securely within the mechanisms of the state and the judiciary. Suddenly, in a series of highly anticipated orders, these files were opened to the public, unleashing a torrent of information that implicated prominent figures across politics, finance, and academia. The fundamental question guiding this intensive analysis is not merely what these documents contain, but critically, why did this definitive disclosure happen now? This extensive examination posits that the simultaneous opening of the Epstein Files is not an accidental event, but rather a structured convergence of three powerful, often competing forces: binding judicial mandates, escalating political prudence necessary for institutional stability, and a systemic obligation to address a profound crisis of public trust in elite accountability. This presentation will be divided into 4 comprehensive parts. First, we will analyze the direct legal mechanisms that compelled the release. Second, we will dissect the political economy and legislative context surrounding the timing. Third, we will explore the critical role of public pressure and institutional legitimacy. And finally, we will assess the immediate fallout and future implications of this unprecedented transparency. Part 1. The Legal and Procedural Imperative. Section 1.1. The Mechanics of Judicial Unsealing. The most immediate and direct catalyst for the recent disclosures was the series of definitive judicial rulings issued in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. These documents originated primarily from a 2015 civil defamation lawsuit filed by Virginia Giuffre against Ghislaine Maxwell. While the civil case was settled, numerous documents remained under seal via protective orders issued by the court to safeguard sensitive information, including the identities of non-parties, minors, and information deemed proprietary or unduly harmful.
However, in American jurisprudence, there exists a strong presumption of public access to judicial records rooted in the First Amendment right of the press and the public to monitor court proceedings. The legal standard requires the parties seeking to maintain secrecy, in this case often those named in depositions or documents, to demonstrate that the need for confidentiality outweighs the public's right to know. Following extensive litigation, the presiding judge ultimately determined that the initial justifications for sealing had significantly diminished, particularly given Epstein's death, Maxwell's conviction, and the overwhelming public interest in the matter. This was a critical legal finding. The private interests of non-parties could no longer supersede the public interest in governmental and judicial transparency regarding a matter of extreme public concern involving alleged systemic abuse. Section 1.2. The Doctrine of Public Access and Transparency Precedents. This recent legal action aligns with a broader trend in judicial review favoring transparency, especially in cases where allegations involve public figures and institutional failures. The court's decision effectively affirmed that the public record cannot be permanently suppressed merely to protect the reputations of individuals, regardless of their societal standing. The legal system, in its function as a check on power, was compelled to demonstrate its adherence to procedural justice. Delaying the release further risked generating an appeal that would likely be lost, forcing the court's hand to act proactively under established legal doctrine rather than being dragged to transparency under duress. Part 2. The Political Economy of Disclosure. Section 2.1. Institutional Vulnerability and Shifting Political Tides. Beyond the courtroom, the political environment created an irresistible force toward disclosure. Following Epstein's mysterious death in a federal correctional facility in 2019, the political establishment, including the Department of Justice, DOJ, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, faced profound scrutiny regarding operational failures and potential cover-ups. The files, while emanating from a civil suit, contained information critical to understanding the breadth of Epstein's network and the apparent institutional indifference that allowed his operation to persist for years.
The political necessity of cleaning house became paramount. In a highly polarized political landscape, these files represented a constant source of political leverage and potential scandal. By allowing the files to remain sealed, institutions were perpetually vulnerable to accusations of complicity or obstruction. Disclosure, therefore, functions as a mechanism of institutional defense. It shifts the focus from the government's handling of the information to the public's handling of the content. It demonstrates, superficially at least, a commitment to accountability necessary to restore confidence in the apparatus of law enforcement and justice. Section 2.2. The Shadow of Legislative and Congressional Oversight.
While no specific, sudden legislation mandated the recent release, the constant threat of intensified congressional scrutiny served as a powerful incentive. Members of Congress, pressured by their constituents, have repeatedly called for comprehensive investigations, including demands for the declassification of all government documents related to Epstein. This ongoing legislative pressure, combined with the possibility of new laws designed to mandate greater transparency in cases of child trafficking and sexual abuse, created an environment where judicial adherence to the public access mandate became politically prudent. The timing also coincided with a period of heightened election cycle sensitivity. Releasing the information in a controlled manner, albeit through a judicial mandate, prevents the matter from being weaponized by political opponents in an uncontrolled leak environment closer to major elections. The systemic decision was likely to absorb the inevitable political shockwave now, allowing time for the political climate to stabilize before major electoral cycles. Part 3. The Public Trust Crisis and Digital Vigilance. Section 3.1. The Persistent Public Demand and Digital Accountability. The Epstein case is unique in its capacity to generate sustained public interest, fueled heavily by digital media and decentralized amateur investigation. The narrative surrounding Epstein became synonymous with elite impunity, the widespread belief that rules and accountability mechanisms do not apply to the ultra-wealthy and politically connected. This perception severely damaged the legitimacy of judicial and governmental processes.
The sustained, intense public pressure acted as a constant audit mechanism. Unlike cases that fade from public memory, the nature of the allegations and the suspicions surrounding Epstein's death ensured the issue remained politically radioactive. Courts and political institutions cannot indefinitely ignore a topic that has become a fundamental test of whether the justice system treats all citizens equally. The opening of the files is fundamentally a concession to the democratic demand for accountability, serving as a critical step toward rebuilding public faith in impartial justice. Section 3.2. Re-establishing institutional legitimacy. For the legal system, especially after the highly criticized plea deal brokered by former prosecutor Alex Acosta and the procedural failures leading to Epstein's death, the imperative was to demonstrate capability for self-correction. Maintaining secrecy would have permanently cemented the public perception that the system protects powerful individuals at the expense of victims. The judicial branch, by fulfilling its mandate of public access, effectively asserted its role as the impartial arbiter, attempting to distance itself from the political and administrative failings of the executive branch and previous prosecutors. Part 4. Analyzing the fallout and future implications. Section 4.1. Legal consequences and further investigations. The release of the files immediately triggers several legal pathways. First, the documents provide foundational evidence for potential new civil litigation by victims seeking to hold additional non-named conspirators accountable. Second, the information may serve as the basis for criminal referrals. The public availability of detailed testimonies and deposition logs forces law enforcement agencies, both domestic and international, to reevaluate whether previously available information was adequately acted upon and to initiate new investigations based on specific names and activities detailed in the records. Section 4.2. Political recalibration and accountability. The political fallout is immediate and severe. High-profile individuals named in the files are now forced to publicly address their associations with Epstein and the contents of the records. This development sets a new precedent for how political history involving such figures is managed. Mere denial is insufficient when court documents provide context. The disclosure contributes to a broader societal movement demanding higher ethical standards for public service and corporate leadership. Section 4.3. The paradox of transparency. While the goal of transparency has been structurally achieved through judicial mandate, the sheer volume and complexity of the released information present a new challenge, the paradox of transparency. The danger now lies not in secrecy, but in noise, the possibility that the overwhelming volume of details, often concerning secondary figures or rumors, diffuses the focus away from prosecuting the primary systemic abuses. The future challenge for investigators, journalists, and the public will be to meticulously sift through this data to ensure the disclosure leads to tangible prosecutorial action and not just political drama. Conclusion: the intersection of forces. The opening of the Jeffrey Epstein files at this specific juncture is a powerful example of how the legal system ultimately bends under the weight of sustained public demand and institutional self-preservation.
It was driven simultaneously by the imperative of judicial doctrine, the public's right to access records, the political necessity of mitigating institutional risk, and the unrelenting crisis of public trust that demanded a visible demonstration of accountability. The files were opened not as a choice of political leadership, but as a structural inevitability when elite power fails to maintain the secrecy required for its protection. The question is no longer why were they opened, but rather what will the consequences of this mandated transparency be for the future of accountability.